Okay, excellent. Thanks, Vanessa. Okay, everybody. Well, here is what I've got on the agenda. Does anyone need a copy of the agenda? Okay. So I believe we're going to hear updates, first of all, about OU1 and OU2 operable units 1 and 2. And any other updates. I think we have a couple other updates in terms of upcoming presentations and things like that. And then we're going to have a quick update and discussion about what's happening with the site cleanup level based on the changing national lead standard. And so we'll hear what's going on with that. We'll talk about what the public comment process will be around that. So yeah, and we'll, you know, take the time we need for that discussion. We're going to have an update on what's happening with the institutional controls, which we'll explain more about what that is for those of you who don't know, which I'm not, I guess everyone knows. Task, Viola is going to check in with everybody, with the cast members about her and Theo's role going forward as the task advisor. And that's it. And then we'll just check in on pending topics, upcoming meetings, schedules, things like that. Is there anything anyone wants to add to the agenda?
Not adding to the agenda, but just housekeeping. Since we are recording the meeting, the owl is capturing the audio, so it's natural to turn to someone next to you and speak, but I will ask that we try to talk to the owl as loudly as we can so that the folks online and the future video can capture the audio as well.
And if you all online, Renee, Jonathan, Paul, can't hear us well, please send a note in the chat. Denise is monitoring it, or if you want to type in, you know, put your virtual hand up or your actual hand up, whatever. And everyone in the room, if you want to say something, feel free to put your name tags up like this or just raise your hand. All right, good. Well, I think with that, Beth, I'm going to turn to you for updates. Yes?
Perfect. All right.
Erica? You, just if you
want to say something, so that's like raising your hand.
I thought you were like, yes.
I know, I was like, oh, Erica, that's something to say. We practice, that's how we.
Yeah, exactly. It may or may not stay up.
It may not stay up. Vanessa, can you pull up my slides? Thank you so much. So for operable unit 1, this includes residential and commercial properties that surround the former smelter area. For residential properties, the soil has stayed consistent since March. We have 97% soil sampling done, 95% soil cleanup done. Dust sampling is continuing to happen. However, as we've talked about for millennia, it's always difficult to get that last percentage of people to sign up. So I know our contractors are going on the ground, are contacting people who have previously refused access. They're trying to get them to participate again. So I have called some folks. So that number may inch up a little bit, but it's always tough to get that last group of people. And then on dust cleanup, we have, I think, just one crew remaining to do this. So the work, you may not see like as many cleanups as we were seeing back when we had a bunch of crews. We have one crew. They're continuing to kind of plug this out. We did set a deadline for dust cleanup for August 30th. We sent out letters to everyone to encourage participation. However, we do have more space in the contract to continue doing cleanup. So whenever someone contacts us and says, hey, is there still time? We're like, of course there's still time through the middle of beginning of November, middle?
We're booked through the middle of November right now. We will probably need to demobilize by December because if there's no more crews or if there's no one else signing up. So right now we are booked through the middle of November. So if someone calls, we'll put them onto that schedule right there. But if we do get that slowdown with calling and no one's on the schedule, we don't want to spend the money to keep crews here just in case there's a one-off. So it'll be the same thing like we did the soils. We'll do like that ultimate, we sent out those ultimate last calls and really just trying to push like, please, this is your last chance for now. Like we're filling up the schedule as much as possible, but we are at that very end of it.
And I will highlight, as we're going to talk about later, y'all are familiar with the fact that the screening level changed. And so this is under, the cleanups we're talking about are under the current cleanup goal that we set in the 2017 interim record of decision. So we'll talk about that more in just a second, but just wanted to clarify that. For the, oh, yes, Mr. Becker. Okay, once I finish this up, I have this and then the OU2 of it, but I'll let you go after this one. So commercial, we are still doing soil sampling at commercial properties where there is soil exposed. So we've sampled 31% of those properties. We got a couple more since last time. And 37% are tagged where they're inaccessible, we can't reach the soil, and then we've got 13% of those properties that have refused. So still making progress, but again, it's a little bit slower on that side. Did you have only one question before I go to Adrian?
I was just asking about the cleanups on the commercial side. Are they gonna get started here or what's going on with that?
The cleanups on commercial, so these are commercial properties within OU1. So those will be wrapped in when we do a final rod.
Yeah, so to clarify, like, we haven't set, I'm not looking at you, so I'm looking at the L, but I am answering you. We have not set the cleanup goal yet for the OU1 commercial properties. So we have an interim record decision that sets the cleanup goal for residential properties. Once we have a final record decision for OU1, then we'll have the cleanup goal. And so I think what we're trying to do is sample as many of the properties as possible, then set up that record of decision for OU1.
Yeah, because that sampling also helps us determine, like, monetary wise, how much we're gonna need and all these things that need to go into the rod and everything like that. So while we have crews, while we have the ability to gain those access and have sampling people out here, we're getting those done. So then when the rod is in place, we can just go ahead and hit the ground running because we already know what properties are gonna require that cleanup.
And Sydney, can you remind me of the timeline we're expecting for that OU1 record of decision? I thought it was not for a few years.
It's a couple years out. We're focusing on residential, which I'll get to in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And kind of explain why the commercial is a little bit further out.
Did that answer the question? Okay. Vanessa, would you, or any other questions, sorry, on operable unit 1 updates? Okay. Operable unit 2 is the former smelter area. So that is the footprint of the former smelter as well as some of the undeveloped areas that surround it. That includes Reunión Lake, Benedict Park, some of those areas. So we are still doing the characterization, remedial investigation. We are gathering data, we're gathering information. We did quarterly groundwater sampling in September, and we're continuing this into 2026. The next event will be in December of this year. We released that screening level ecological risk assessment, which is the first ecological risk assessment, looking at, like, as our pastors like to say, the bunnies and bugs, looking at all the different animals and plants that are in the area and how they can be affected by contamination. The next risk assessments will include the human health risk assessment and the baseline ecological risk assessment. So all of those will come together into the remedial investigation report, which will give us the full picture of where the contamination is, how it's moving, how it's affecting the life down there. Next, we are kind of continuing discussions about future use with interested stakeholders. That's kind of an ongoing discussion. The city of Pueblo is planning to conduct cleanup in the jungle area, that OU2 former smelter area, in October of 2024. They let us know about this plan and kind of coordinated about how they can do that cleanup safely with the contamination down there. And the Bojan Town Foundation, run by the Kochmans, submitted a grant to do some rehabilitation work at Benedict Park, and we're also looking to understand the scope of their work and what they're planning to do. The other thing I will highlight on operable unit 2, as many of y'all are aware, there is a significant unhoused population down in operable unit 2. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
No, it wasn't.
Okay. So there are some unhoused folks living down there, and we are meeting once a month with EPA and the NGOs that are involved in that work. So if you're interested in participating in those meetings, please let us know. Erica and I run those meetings, and we'd love to include you on that discussion, because we're trying to keep the discussion on the unhoused population specifically to those meetings, because this CAG meeting, Community Advisory Group, is supposed to be focused on the whole site, and that's kind of our subgroup to talk about unhoused and how we can coordinate it.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, of course.
Can you, to articulate sort of what the scope of those conversations are? Are they how the situation with the unhoused residents there is interacting with the Superfund site, or is it more generally how the city's dealing with it?
Yeah, so it's really focused on how it's affecting the EPA Superfund site. Really, it's kind of for EPA to hear from the NGOs of the work that they're doing, what's going on down there, for us to stay updated and make sure that the information that we're putting out is relevant and helpful. I will highlight that there is a city meeting, the Community Commission for Housing and Homelessness. That's run, if any of y'all remember Lexi Romero, she is a facilitator for that meeting. That's a city-run meeting. I think it is just happened, like a week ago. I can't find it. Regardless, that meeting is the city meeting to really discuss on how, it's actually next Thursday, so it's on the 17th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. So that's really the city's opportunity to discuss on house issues and how they're managing them throughout the community.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. For sure.
Any other questions? Any updates?
That is my update.
It says you were also talking
Oh,
about the website.
Thank you so much. So we have the EPA website, epa.gov/Superfund/Colorado Smelter. The way that it's operated, all the back end stuff doesn't really matter that much. However, it's kind of antiquated. It only has certain categories. And so since this site is active, there's a lot of residential exposure here. So we are updating the website and we are going to make it prettier, make it more accessible, more photos. So this has been in the works for a while, and based on the usage of the site, because we can see how many people visit the website, we're looking for a couple volunteers to participate in a user survey with headquarters to kind of give your feedback on when you go to the site, what are you looking for? What do you find? How easy is it? So I'm looking at Terry, because I'm hoping to get him to volunteer. But I'd like at least one person from the community advisory group to participate in this user group. I'll also be reaching out to like local government, to realtors. So I have a couple of different buckets of people. I'm hoping to get a few representatives to help us build the best website that we can.
I just wonder, do you all have a sense of who, community-wise, who might visit the website and why? And if not anyone from here, is there someone who's?
Over the last month, I've noticed that there's been 2 contractors come in, and yes, it's road work, but they have no clue that they're even in the Superfund site.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was interested in going to the site because they're a big time contract.
Yeah.
But the one little guy that I ran into just over here on Evans and Mesa, he's filling a dump truck full of dirt.
Yeah.
Had no clue he's inside the Superfund site. And how are you gonna get this information to the people with the road crews, to the city? I know there's 2 pieces of property. One of the realtors knew it was in the Superfund site. One of them didn't.
Yeah.
But it was down there in the Mesa Junction area where you just kind of expanded it, so I'm not sure, whatever. But you've got contractors going in there that have no clue. And you gotta realize the guys that did the work on Washington and Evans, who moved 30+ cubic yards of material and took it someplace.
Yeah.
And yes, you guys aren't really concerned about the road. But you gotta realize since 1930, everything under asphalt and concrete's been frozen in time.
Mm-hmm.
So it hasn't been not diluted by the elements of life.
Yeah.
So to me, that would be more contaminated than stuff that's been outside into the elements.
Yeah, you asked a really good question. So I did get your input when you saw that road work happening, and I did forward it to the public works director at the city. And I think that's going to be our best avenue, because I agree with you. We do want, so let me finish that. I think that that's our best way to share that information with the contractors, because we share the best practices. We want them to know the boundary. So I know we have a meeting with them tomorrow. We can reiterate that about the Superfund boundary, make sure that they're passing that out to their contractors. The realtors is a separate issue, and honestly, hearing that there are still realtors who are not aware, that's been on my radar. I think 2 years ago, I had a good set of meetings with the realty community to let them know about the boundary. I'm planning to do that in the future. So I think when you let us know, like, oh, I'm seeing these people, they're not aware, that's really helpful, because we do have our mechanisms in place and we're trying to disseminate that information. But hearing this crew didn't know this is happening here, that's really helpful. So I commit to you that I will set up meetings with the Pueblo Association of Realtors and the Southern Colorado Rental Association and ask them to distribute among their network so that they, especially now that we have a click dashboard, they can find the data really easily.
Well, I think that's the problem. The big time guy was interested. He kind of wanted to know how to get to the dashboard.
Yeah.
Just to make sure the material he was hauling off could be okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to comment, not only is it the city, but that project is being run by Pueblo water.
Well, I did reach out to the public works director and deputy director to talk to them about that and inform them, like, if they're doing sewer work or anything like that, to make sure that their workers are informed and the best recommendations of putting that soil back into what they're digging, because they were just replacing pipes opposed to like.
Well,
digging new
I
ones.
think in understanding the construction that these places, and again, this is public water, this has nothing to do with the city, it controls the water on this. That water line has to be put into a bed of sand. And then any road base has to be met to a certain specification to be compacted. So that contractor told me that dirt had to be gone. They cannot put it back in that hole just because of the process it takes in today's construction. I'm sorry. if you're looking at that. And so I think that when you go in there and do things like that, the material is gonna have to be removed.
And Kevin, thank you for that. I think that also brings up, which I think Sarah's about to talk about, we can kind of jump, because this goes to one of the points on the agenda is institutional controls. And that's something with the overlay district that I'm gonna pass to Sarah to kind of explain a little bit more, but that is to capture things like this, that if people are working within the Superfund area, there's a flag, there's something there that tells you, hold on, you're in a Superfund area. So if Sarah will emphasize a little bit more on that.
So, Kevin, yeah, I'll talk with the owl, but I'm talking to you. So under the ordinance, like, I think when you pointed this out, that brought it to my attention as well. And the draft ordinance that we have addresses both, I know we focused a lot on the private landowners in the ordinance overlay district, but it addresses public right-of-way issues as well. And it does cover, so it doesn't, because the ordinance is not in place yet. It needs to go through city processes to be implemented in this city. But all the public right-of-way and all the subsequent projects that go on in that right-of-way for infrastructure improvements and things like that eventually are covered by some language in the ordinance that says that if a utility, public or private, is doing work, they're subject to the same soil management requirements. And so they will, and we just actually met with Scott Hobson with planning today, and I think in the in-between, they're trying to keep us up to date on all the projects that are going on in the area and make sure that people are aware until that ordinance is established. But obviously, you know, if you talk to a contractor that said they didn't know, then that's definitely something, you know, and I'm glad that we brought it to the best attention. But just so you know, that is covered in the ordinance language once that's passed, and then hopefully that's one of those layers that can intercept things like that, and people will be informed and also be able to talk to me and ask about how they should handle their soil during the project. So.
And Kevin, I don't know if part of your question was how, if you don't have it along, or Selma or Terry or Paul don't have it along and see a person like that, how do normal people, how do residents know to contact Beth or Sydney so that they can contact their, the city and Sarah? So I think it's a legitimate question.
Well, I don't think they know, because I actually walked over and talked to a gentleman who was standing there. And this is at Evans in Washington, right on the border. And he really had no clue. Okay, he had his tested, he had his report to see where his lead actually stood. But he was informed that he kind of indicated a lot of his neighbors really didn't care. And if you go through the neighborhood, you can tell the yard that somebody paid attention to in the yard that somebody did. You know, and so, and this is affecting the property owners that we're trying to sell and trying to maintain. And I'm not sure why, but there's a lot of property to sell there.
Okay.
Yep, I think, Kevin, your point is very well taken. That's something that we struggle with or I struggle with all the time, because we send out mailings, we go door to door, like I think we have a pretty good strategy of sharing information, but there are always property owners who fall through the cracks, who we leave information and throw it away. So I think that's a very real concern. That's why I think the like multi-layer approach of reaching out to the realty community, asking them to distribute it, making sure that we share the click database on the city website, having the overlay district, having outreach to the city and their sub-coverage. So like as many points of contact as we can have, and having the tag numbers to talk to their neighbors, so like, I know it's not a perfect approach, and I recognize that, but kind of a patchwork approach of sharing that information. And if you do have like specific contractors that you know and contact, you be like, hey, you should let them know. That's like, I'm very happy to do that.
Well, like I said, one guy was interested, one guy could care less.
Yeah. Welcome to my life.
Thanks
So,
for-
yeah.
I think that's a really good thing to note as well, because I think, as far as what we've been trying to work with the ordinance on is making sure the public is informed, but kind of meeting with the city today and having, reinforcing with Scott that it's helpful in the in-between time for him to point out projects like this is helpful. And so like, I'll note that, I think as a group, we can continue to not only try to reach out to, citizens, but also the city to make sure, because it's like these extra, or to, public entities as a whole.
Well, the project on Washington and Evans was an emergency.
Right.
Okay, it was a broken valve or whatever.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like on a list of projects coming up.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, this had nothing to do with the city, with any water line within the city or county. It's controlled by Pueblo water.
And Viola, can I go before you for like a second? I think Jimmy, or not Jimmy, I'm sorry. You're also
Well,
right.
it's James Kevin.
James, I know, James. I
Sound
think
like my brother.
Pueblo water is great. A great point, because we have to protect the city. So I think we'll reach out to Pueblo Water as well to make sure that they have the resources and they know to contact us. So we'll find a good contact there. So thank you. Sorry about that.
Your hand is enough, is it? No. Okay.
Oh,
It's
I
just-
thought your hand was up.
Velma, welcome. We did intros before you got here, but
I'm late.
we know you have another meeting that goes into this one, but do you wanna introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Velma Campbell. I'm a Pueblo resident, member of the K. I have a background in public health with a specialty in occupational and environmental health sciences. And, I'm a semi-professional troublemaker.
Good trouble.
Semi-professional. And Velma, I don't know if you've met the folks around, so Jacob from Senator Bennett's office, Viola Booker from Sitio, Erica Serna from EPA, and Pedro Ayala, and I think also EPA, and, everybody, okay.
I will just add, so Erica is the new Amanda and Pedro is the new Anna. Just so you know where they fit in the order.
Okay, good. Beth, are you good on updates? Are we going
I
to-
am good on updates. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think next on the, agenda here is checking in about the cleanup levels, Sydney.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we are making forward progress. You guys know and have been along for this really fun ride of determining what's happening with the new guidance. I cannot give y'all numbers yet, but I'm hoping by the end of the week, I will have a memo finalized. Within this memo, it was conducted by our talks folks. So y'all know Charlie Partridge and Jason Fritz, and Caleb Stockdale, who have done a lot of work on the human health side. Basically, the new guidance that we've been talking about that got released in January of 2024 recommended screening lead at 200 ppm, which correlates to a blood lead level of 5. And then if there's other contributing factors, that you should screen at 100 parts per million, which correlates to a blood lead level of 3.5. So both of those numbers, years ago, CDC had recommended 10 micrograms per deciliter. I think back in 2012, they changed it to 5, and then they also changed their reference value down to 3.5 recently. Just a reminder, those are reference values, so those are different than risk-based values that we use. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers, but you also just stop me if this is like getting too convoluted.
Maybe, wait, I have a suggestion of like, staying super high level first, like big picture before even numbers. Can you do that in terms of how the CDC relates to the changing of the EPA?
It doesn't really, but just, so the reference level from CDC is that 97% of children are below that blood lead level. And so that's just a reference level, reference value. So that's just like, it will always be a moving target going lower as in general, the population is more lead conscious. Like as we eliminated lead-based paint, as we eliminated leaded gasoline. So that's just something that it's kind of, for lack of a better word, it's kind of a moving target, but EPA will tend to follow and help guide with that along with updated science. And I'm gonna pause because I think Velma, you generally work in this world a little bit as well.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question as well as a comment. You mentioned that the screening level at 200 parts per million correlates to the blood lead level of 5. Over what period of time? Is there a time factor?
It's just 0 to 72 months.
Oh, no, I don't mean age, I mean like exposure time?
It's for residential exposure. So it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
For how many years?
For 70 years.
Okay, so it's a lifetime.
It's a lifetime exposure, yes, sorry.
It would result in a blood lead level on average of 5. Right. Because, and the comment I was gonna make was that the way, it gets really confusing a lot of times between EPA and blood lead level from CDC because they're used for different but related purposes.
Right.
So what I just went through with Sydney is the CDC's value says this is as high as we would want to see a child have a blood lead because at this level, in fact, at that level, they can still detect adverse effects, but that's like the lowest practical level. So CDC's blood lead level is talking about the health of the exposed, usually child. And the EPA's value is saying what level of exposure would get that child to that level. Yeah. So that's like, what would you have to be around in the environment in EPA's world to
Potentially
have your
result in
blood
that.
lead level be what CDC would consider dangerous?
That was very well said.
Thank you.
Velma is my plant. I had to make sure that she was here before we went
It's a
in.
long time to figure that out. It's, you know, I've worked to figure that out. And I confuse myself with it all the time.
Velma, before we move on, did you have a question too? Because Aaron's
No,
here.
I did,
Okay.
that I asked you,
Okay.
which was the length of time,
Okay.
is a lifetime dose.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Aaron?
So like if you're sitting in the yard playing for 20 minutes and you start out with non-detectable blood lead, you're not gonna get
You're
a
not gonna
blood
jump.
lead level in one day of 5. But, over time, you will accumulate that.
I
Aaron?
just wanted to add what we see, I mean, that's all academics and on books, but in the real world, you know, with multiple lead exposures, you know, we're talking lead-based paint, talking, you know, with the soil and with possibly water lines, depending on the house and what they have. Not the water lines going in, but, we're talking about the old plumbing in the homes. There's a lot of, solder and stuff, but we see a lot of exposures from, everything, costume jewelry versus, old toys, and that's the thing, we'll see these kids get a huge dose as somebody remodeled their home and didn't clean it up, and these kids get a huge dose, and that's where we're picking them up at. But yeah, it's hard to put it all together when we have all these book numbers versus what happens in the real world, and that's why the screening is so important. But again, the screening is only a snapshot of that 30-day time exposure that they've been exposed to, because by that time, you're not going to be able to pick it up that way in the blood. And so there's just a lot of, you can, I guess, have difficult ways to really dial in and find exactly what you're looking for with all these other exposures that are out there as well. We find that all the time when we're on our inspections and risk assessments. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there too. Even though the good thing is it's going in the right direction. All these numbers are going down. There should be zero lead in anybody's body. It's going to be detrimental to them. So, that's worth that human health side. That's important for physicians to realize.
Yeah, just, Aaron's point is a really excellent one from the environmental health standpoint, because we often, like you say, academically treat one exposure like it's the only thing a person is exposed to. And even our standards are developed that way, like drinking water standards have like multiple chemicals, but they're all treated like it's the only thing you're exposed to, each one. And so there's movement towards trying to develop ways to evaluate the combination of exposures that occur in the real world. But that's a really important point, that the kids pick up stuff from the soil and paint it everywhere else. And so that's really what we're doing.
Yeah, and I'll kind of tie that back into the memo now. So when I mentioned like the 200 parts per million correlating to a 5, and then if there are other factors like lead-based paint or leaded pipe, like water lines and things like that, this memo recommends screening to that more sensitive 100 parts per million with a blood level of 3.5, because there are other contributing factors within the community. So right now, with the 2017 interim record of decision, our cleanup goal is 350, and that relates to 6.24 micrograms per deciliter. So what this memo will show, as soon as we get it finalized, it'll become public knowledge. What I was planning on doing was sending out the tag so all of y'all can have it, and then also maybe just blasting the stakeholders, letting them know that it's on the website and just that it's there, it's public record. So what the memo will show is our cleanup goal right now at 6.24. What a cleanup goal would be site specifically to a blood lead level of 5, and what the cleanup goal would be site specifically to a blood lead level of 3.5. So this memo isn't making any decisions. It's not telling us which numbers to choose. I can't share those numbers with you. I'm really sorry. We're super close. But basically, all of this is to say is once that memo comes out, Sabrina and I will hit the ground running to get an explanation of significant difference plus, which basically it's going to be an add-on to the IROD that says we're changing the cleanup goal to level X because of these reasons. And then what the ESD plus does is allows for open comment period. And so I know a lot of like feedback is always like, how did you choose this? Why did you choose this? Et cetera, like that. If, let's say in theory we go to the 5, and then the community says, no, we want to do 3.5, that public comment period is where you put those in. Because we will not finalize and we have to address every comment that comes out. Alternatively, we could say, we believe this community should be at the level of 3.5, and someone else could say, no, we don't need that, this community really should be at 5, right? So it can go any way you want, but really the point of doing this explanation of significant difference plus is to have that public comment period. That's bringing me to my next point, and a question for the CAG members is, once we get closer to that time, would you like time dedicated to CAG for us to explain the public comment period, like a little refresher, because I know you guys have had this before, but a refresher on like how the comments are addressed, how you should be submitting them, what that period is. I believe it's going to be a 30-day period for you to submit those comments, and then who answers them and how they will be addressed. If you guys want that, I think it would be most beneficial to do it as we're closer to when that public comment period opens, so that it's fresh in y'all's mind. Is that something that you guys would like to have done? Would that be helpful?
So, Velma, Paul, Kevin, Terry, what do y'all think? Do you want to sort of restate the question or your thoughts? So the question is really, there is going to be public comment when it comes closer, which sounds like it's a matter of months. Would you all like some time at a CAG meeting where there's some discussion on reminder about the purpose of public comment, the scope of the public comment, who reads them, how they're answered, what you all may want or not want to say, I suppose, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think that, when we've done it in the past, I think we were talking about this earlier today. When we've done it in the past and there was a comment period, we had that kind of an explanation of how it worked and what our role could be. And then we had the specific conversation about whether we as individuals wanted to do the specific commenting or whether we wanted to have CAG as a group do it. And I think that we came to the conclusion it was both, because we didn't want to exclude anybody. We didn't know for sure if CAG would be 100% unanimous or not. And so we said, how about if we do both? And so I think that we started with the process of making sure that we understood what was being said, and then here at the CAG, and then what we could do about it. Then we put together our comments from the CAG's perspective, but then we made it crystal clear to each and every member in the CAG or the members of the public that had come to the meeting, if they wanted to do an individual comment, they could do that as well. And then the discussion about where that goes. Paul and I were having a little conversation about it earlier today, that it's my understanding that whenever you do raise a comment, then it's recorded in the document, and that there needs to be an answer of some kind. An EPA may agree with it, they may disagree, they may say, hey, this is a thought that we hadn't had before, and then talk about how that would be dealt with within it. It may modify something EPA is doing, but it will be addressed. It'll be in there and it'll be addressed. So all of that said, we thought yes to all of the above. Do we want to learn the process again? Yes, it's been a while. Secondly, do we want to do it as individuals and CAG as a whole? Yes, we do.
Okay. Yeah, and that was, Terry, that was a great explanation, and really it's more just like, because it's still early stages, because I needed this memo before I could even start working on anything else. I'm hoping to get this done, I'd say, like, giving myself a deadline of mid-year next year of getting this ESP plus out and commented on. I want to get back in the field as soon as we can, and I can't put a new contract in place until I have this, because we do need that public comment period, right? We are changing the goal. I think I can safely say that now. We are changing the goal. But the question is to what? So that answers, how many more homes does that encompass? What is the cost? What is the timeline of that looking like? And all of that cannot be decided until we have this open period for people to say stuff. And, again, everything is addressed. I know there's been comments in the past, not with documents like this, but where, for example, with our sampling design, and not liking a sampling design, but that's not really an area that can be changed because that's just EPA policy. Versus now, we are welcoming these comments and hoping to get them because they must be answered and they have to be addressed one way or another.
And Sydney, that's one of the things that we talked a little bit about was the fact that we've raised several issues over the last several years, specifically included this averaging,
The area weighted average.
exactly.
Mhm.
And so we have always raised concerns. I think we even wrote a letter on that about how that works. And so one thing that I'm assuming that we will probably want to hear is, how does this affect that? And then the second thing is we may very well wish to comment on that, on what we think about that today.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So this is definitely and as this gets closer, I just wanted to bring it up. I was hopeful, I was very optimistic that the memo would be done and I could share it tonight, but we're on like the final touches. And it's really just those inputs. Like the inputs are secured. We've used the most up-to-date model of the integrated, the IUBK, so the integrated, I'm not even use uptake biokinetics. Okay, well, anyway, we've used like the latest and greatest models, everything that's up to maternal blood level. We've done site-specific bioavailability. We've done site-specific tracking of soil to dust. So we will also be modifying the dust cleanup level that we're doing, which is very specific. I will tell you that like we are one of like 2 sites in Region 8 that actually goes with cyclones. So you guys are, we do care about the community a lot. So that's also being looked at. And again, so this memo is like basically one of the stepping stones to get us to this new cleanup goal and make sure that this community stays protected and with the latest and greatest.
I'm in agreement with Terry on that. I've just had a couple of questions about, preparation for the public comment. And that is, excuse me. It seems like if you're gonna be asking members of the CAG and the public to comment on preferences for, particularly between blood lead targets, and cleanup targets, it might be helpful to have, some models or examples, of impacts, at those levels, because people are gonna say, well, what does that really mean? Yeah. I realize that you can't really make, a full and complete cleanup plan until you know sort of what your targets are gonna be. But if you could develop some relevant examples of what, maybe, a guess at how many yards might.
Oh, like how many yards would then qualify with the change?
Yeah, I mean, people
Okay.
are gonna say, what does this mean,
I can definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I realize you can't get too deep.
Well, I was like, I can't do like the blood level is expected to drop
Right.
this percent.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
couldn't do that, but I can definitely provide,
Right.
once we have this
Yeah.
new cleanup goal,
Mhm.
if we went to cleanup
And
goal
then,
A,
yeah.
this many
Yeah.
homes would
And
need
then
that.
using the, conversion formulas to maybe have like, suppose 5-year-old child plays in the yard at this level for 2 hours a day for a year. How does that affect their, because I know there are conversion formulas for those kinds of exposures.
So there are, and that kind of changes it from like whether we're looking at a residential exposure, which I'll touch a little bit about versus like a park exposure.
Yeah.
Right, so with residential,
Right. And
we're
that's
looking
what
at
we're
70
mainly
years
talking about. Right.
full-time exposure. Parks, we're looking
Right.
more of like 5 days a
Right.
week, 3 hours per visit,
Right.
per.
But when they,
Right.
but to make residential exposures meaningful to community members, then we need to be able to discuss them in terms of real life activities. So to be able to go from, the usual activities of a kid in the summer in the yard. Parents are gonna wanna know in those terms, what does this mean? Because nobody's kid, and hopefully nobody's kid plays in the yard for 70 years. And we all know that.
So Velma,
But I think that's gonna be kind of information that people are gonna wanna hear in order to get public comment meaningful.
so that's what I was, so it seems like you're talking about how to make it meaningful for people to give public comment that's informed and that they have something to say about, and that for them to do that,
Like,
they need it in plain terms relating to real world examples. So is that the function of the memo? Is that the function of public outreach and communications before public comment?
well, I think,
Then I
it
guess-
sounds like I'm envisioning, and Aaron, you probably have a lot of experience with this in the LED program too, fact sheets that, about what certain exposure levels in the yard might mean to,
Yeah.
to an exposed child.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this to Beth and then add on if need be.
Okay, so I think Velma, excellent point, as always. I think what I'm hearing from you is that when we do have this conversation, preparing you guys for the public comment period, these are the questions and the information that will be most helpful to you to be able to submit those comments. So like, how many properties would be affected if it's this cleanup level or this cleanup level? And then understanding some of those like most realistic circumstances that we know about from the health department, like if a kid is doing these activities, how would that equate into that? So I've written those down, but I think we may or may not be able to share kind of that calculation, so to give you something digestible to say, okay, if it's this, here's what we think we're gonna see. If it's this, here's what we think we're gonna see. So my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're looking to have that information in the CAG meeting when we discuss comment period, how to submit comments, that's the information you're looking for. I will also say before I pass it to you, that part of our strategy whenever we roll out a decision document like this is to do an outreach push. We are required by law to put something in the newspaper. I know it's very antiquated, but that's something we're required to do. I also have a list of other outreach types that I would like to use to inform people. There is this decision document and kind of break it down like you're talking about, of like, this would mean these things, so that folks outside of the CAG also know that this document is out there and to comment on it. But I want to pass it to you to hear what you have.
I do, I am saying that, some examples of real world exposure scenarios, I think would be helpful for us, but also for, community members as part of the outreach, project. I mean, when somebody might bring their kid into my office and say, I found them playing in, and the rare occasion when I actually have information about what the exposure is, they're not asking me 70 years from now what will their blood lead be. They're asking me to measure their blood lead and whether or not it's something due to the exposure that they just had. And so, I know there are formulas out there that can take exposure and go to an estimate of blood lead.
Yeah.
And so those that's kind of what I'm thinking of.
So I see both Aaron and Bella, and it sounds like, Velma, you're talking about both, I think, of your questions, both for the
Yeah,
cat
yeah.
and.
Is it okay, can I cut in line? Can I go before Aaron and, or do you wanna go first? Okay, I'm sorry, I should have put my card up first. I think, and I'll pass it to them, one of the things that I struggle with in EPA's role is that we're not a public health agency, so what I'm hearing is a little bit more public health, and honestly, that's why I'm very happy that Aaron, and I will pass it to him very shortly, because I think what EPA typically looks at, like lifetime exposure, those types of things, so we will see, I think it's a good thing for us to consider and really think hard about before we share that information, but I just wanted to, you're already familiar with that, but we really value our partnership with the public health department, I think they are on the forefront of that, so anyway, I will pass it to Aaron.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, we're staying on this project as long as we, well, it's not gonna end. I mean, it's part of our program. That is one of the struggles we have, is just even the education to the parents. I mean, we have a caseload right now, I think we have 15 open cases.
Are those, sorry, to clarify, are those cases of like elevated blood levels?
Elevated blood levels, and we can't even get the parents to bring them in for follow-ups, and it's very difficult to, even when we go over the education and the exposures, and if they let us into the home to do an inspection and narrow down where it's at, I mean, that helps a lot, but yeah, the education side is huge, that just doesn't seem to, I don't know, I guess we just can't do enough of it, we need to continue on. But we are gonna stay on offering this, and, our point is to really work with the physician's offices, and hopefully the state health department is kind of moving that way to work with the physicians, that way it's happening at that level too, not just us doing the screening and figuring out, it needs to be in the whole healthcare system, really. So we are staying on, as long as they fund us, and there's money.
Viola, yes,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, maybe, past can support in terms of what we may have, internally, because we do work with communities, nationwide, and we could have something like that available for that meeting.
I think that, yeah, like to just stay on with that, because I think Viola will speak a little bit about the role of task, and I think that's a good plug to where we can kind of also guide, like, not only just a CAG meeting to discuss the public comment period, but almost like for task to help go through what this ESD plus is saying, and how you guys can help to formulate meaningful comments that can then be addressed by EPA. But yeah, I just wanted to like tie that in, because we will go to that in a little bit. I know we're a little bit over time, so Selma, do you wanna make one more comment?
Yeah, one, it's a little bit different, but relating back to Chair's comment about the CAG did several years ago, with staff, analyzed the, decision units in the yards. We did a study of the use of time-weighted averaging in the yards. Not so much the issue of time-weighted averaging per se, but how it was being applied. Because we had concerns about some yards with markedly elevated levels, but in one section of the yard, but the other sections, when combined with that, didn't add up.
are you saying the area weighted averaging, or am I missing? Oh,
I'm sorry, area weighted.
Okay,
not
I just
time-weighted,
wasn't sure I
sorry.
was correct.
Area weighted averaging.
Yeah.
Sorry, area weighted averaging. And so, we asked the staff to analyze the data for us from the yards that have been sampled at that point. for how many yards were there, which had significantly elevated levels in one or more decision units, but didn't average up to the cleanup level. 2/3 of the yard sample had at least one decision unit that was elevated well above the cleanup limit. And yet, because of the way the not area weight averaging as a methodology, but the way it was applied, resulted in those yards not being cleaned up. And in fact, there was a document, when the whole design was supposed to be put in place, that explained that part of the reason for using the area weight averaging the way it was used was because this being an older neighborhood with tiny little yards, there was a concern that if they brought equipment in to clean up one decision unit, they might mess up the yard and then have to clean up at least do some repairs that wouldn't otherwise have really been cleaned up. So rather than have to clean up yards, clean up's the wrong word, rather than have to do some remediation on a yard, after cleanup of the decision unit, the decision was made to average the whole yards and not, because the yards are small and hard to get into. Our feeling was, in the tag letter, that we understood some of the reasons for using area weight averaging that way, but that particular reason for using it that way was not acceptable, because it basically was a matter of convenience. It was ignoring contaminated areas because the yards were too hard to get into. And that just wasn't acceptable. We sent a letter to that effect, and we got back a letter explaining area weight averaging to us.
And Belmont, I've heard this many times, so you're bringing it up here.
I'm bringing it up here because now that we're gonna have the new cleanup levels, some of those yards and then, those tables of the data that are organized that way, might want to be reviewed. I mean, I'm just wondering
We will,
whether some of those yards might now
They
come
might,
under
yes,
cleanup.
yeah, and they might, so
Yeah.
we're not gonna take any more samples unless that 2% that had previously been refused
Right.
have new owners and now they'll come in. But we will, with this new cleanup goal, we will reevaluate and screen every
Review the
single
data.
home. Yeah, so
Mhm.
any home that has already had a cleanup, we're not expecting to have a new one, because that backfill that we put in was clean fill, well below this new cleanup goal, whatever that cleanup goal may be. The only reason a property may need an additional cleanup if they've had one is if the play area or the garden area was, like, that was the only area remediated, right? So like, let's say this is the whole yard and this was the garden and like this was the only elevated area. We'll go back now and look at this whole section to make sure, does this still, is this
And
still?
then, oh, sorry, I'm gonna interject real quick here, Bob, because I hope this might help. So what I'm hearing from you is that when we do share all of this information and we look at the cleanup goals and we look at how many properties would be affected, it sounds like the CAG is asking for kind of a breakdown of those properties that had one elevated decision unit. How many of them would then be cleaned up under the new cleanup level? Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I think that would approach answering the question part of it.
Yeah, I mean, after we learned it, I wish that we had the chicken and egg is where the decisions units would determine and then the sampling happened. And then we would tell you which area was being used for gardens or for play areas, because I guarantee you, we'd have lined it up pretty nicely.
But,
We didn't have that
but I
opportunity.
think, you know, if you had one, there was at least one where the decision unit was around 1,000. And if you average that with the other decision units under the new regime, then that yard might not qualify.
Yeah, and I can
Yeah.
give you guys numbers on any property that previously did not qualify and now qualifies. I don't know if it'll go to the granularity of like, if we had originally looked at this property, decision unit by decision unit, would it still qualify? So
Yeah, but you see, I think.
I get what you're
I'm
saying.
asking.
I
Yeah.
also, it's hard to ask y'all to wait, but with insider knowledge,
Perfectly
we're
all right.
gonna be cleaning up a lot of the
Yeah.
site. So let's just, just put a pin on it.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. And I think that if the ESD plus doesn't specifically say we will be cleaning up 500 more homes, that's something that I can provide for y'all,
Sure.
right? That's something that I could very easily do, pull those numbers, say this is our new universe of homes that we're aiming to clean. That can all be true. I just don't know if it must be included in the ESD. I'm trying to push this ESD through as fast as possible, not for like not considering everything. Like y'all know how long we've worked on this, but so that we can get back out and start cleaning and start reducing this exposure that's there. So I hear all this. I think this is great. I think to wrap it all back up, I'll make sure to keep you guys informed of where I am in that process. Maybe the month before that public comment period is planned to open, we'll convene, go through everything about what a public comment period means, what would be most useful in terms of comments, like, is it better to get it from a CAG as a whole entity? Is it better to get it as an individual? Who's gonna be answering those questions in what time frame? And so then I think we can kind of readdress this because then I'll be able to share more with y'all. And then I'll pick to like Viola potentially, like if she wants to offer like how you guys just have the steering committees, like offer a separate meeting with tasks once the ESD plus comes out to help y'all formulate those questions and things like that. I don't know that EPA is allowed to help you guys formulate questions to then come back at us, because I'm basically like asking a question to ask myself. But I think that's also like when we're gonna get there in just a second, like what task is for. So I'm gonna call quits on this topic for now, just to get us back on topic, and I'm gonna kick it to Sarah for institutional controls. But we are getting really close, I promise. I know I keep telling you all that, but like I have the memo in hand in draft, and it's just like waiting to be stamped finally. So we're getting there.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
All right, institutional control.
So I already touched on it, I think, and so I can make it very quick. I don't have a ton of a different update than the one that I've had the last few times. I know that this has been slowly kind of rolling down the road, but Sydney and I did meet with Scott Hobson face to face right before we came over here, which was very helpful. We got some clarification on the order that things go in as far as getting an ordinance through city council processes and things like that. So for your information, the next step is to get this official survey done that defines the area, like very particularly. We had gone back and forth with the city on if they want to do that, because I don't hire surveyors very often, but planning has said that they would prefer that the state hires, like we do it entirely within us. And so I will work on getting the surveyor contacted to get the meets and bounds for that area. Once that happens, then it starts the process on the planning department's end for notification and going through all the different readings of the ordinance. So Sydney and I will join the planning commission meeting where they then make a recommendation to the city council, and then it's read by the city council. And so I think just as far as timelines go, we're probably still a matter of months out, just because survey takes a while. multiple readings on city council meetings takes a while, and it kind of goes down the line. So, but it is, you know, still kind of slowly rolling through that way.
But you haven't got any dates yet for the planning commission or anybody else?
No, because it's basically dependent on the survey. I know surveyors work year round, but hopefully we can get them out there before everything is snowing. So,
Gotta get that legal description.
yes. Yes.
They're gonna be for a week too as well, or just?
This is definitely one. So this is just one of, you know, like I know that we've talked about this before, but this ordinance is an institutional control. It's not necessarily the only one. We talked a few meetings ago about like more outreach efforts and things like that, which also qualify as institutional in some ways. But this ordinance is one of the institutional controls for OU1 alone, and then as we move forward in OU2, there will be other conversations about controls that might need to exist there if once we get there.
And if people want refreshers on sort of a reminder about the overlay district and this particular control, we can resurrect the past presentations are also all on the website. And ping me if you want a reminder of which meeting we talked about that at, and I can find the meeting summary and I can find relevant presentations. So anyway, we have all that stuff. We can bring it back whenever people want to get their head around it again.
Yeah, whatever the proper timing, I frankly would like that to make sure that we're all back up to speed and think it through. One of the things that, you know, that I've experienced, I don't know if others have experienced, is still we're having a little bit of difficulty, we as citizens, we as members of the CAG, of weighing in with the city on our questions and concerns. CPAG has been wide open with us, the AG's office has been wide open with us, PPA has been wide open with us. But it's been a little more difficult for us to kind of weigh in there, and I don't know for sure if there's a lot of value, but frankly, I think there is, because of the fact that we've been working on this for so long, and we've definitely raised some concerns. I had a nice conversation with Sarah, I think it's probably months ago now, time passes, but we literally talked through some of the issues that I had seen and that we had seen, and then how that is handled in this entire process. And then I did have a sidebar conversation with one of the city employees about 2 or 3 weeks about it. Basically, again, raising questions and concerns just to make sure that how we go about this as a city ordinance is the concern. And, you know, and I shared with Sarah and with anybody else that cares to talk to me about it. While from an EPA perspective and a CDPHE perspective, this is kind of normal business as well, how you wish to go, making the leap from EPA imposing something, or making the leap from state of Colorado to the CDPHE imposing something, into the city imposing something on its citizens, I frankly think is a significant political leap. And so I've been concerned to make sure that all of our city folks that work on it, all of our city folks that would ultimately vote on it, have a real good understanding what this means and the time frame for what it means and the costs associated with it. And time frame, forever. That, I think, is a significant issue all by itself. If we're lawyers, we have to study the rule against perpetuities and everything, and nothing's supposed to last forever. Well, this is designed to last forever. And then the question that came up earlier tonight is, to what degree will citizens even know about this? Well, we're making lots of efforts as we move toward the ordinance, but as of right now, there isn't a direct connection to folks sometimes that are doing the work. When we get it in place for a period of time, we may have some direct connections into those kind of folks, but that'll fade over time. And that's literally what I have worried about from day one on this, and then the costs associated and the impact on our city and our citizens that ultimately bear this cost and risk from an economic perspective. You know, we may understand it today, but folks in the future may not necessarily understand it as well. So that has been my concern. I've had some of the members of the city assuage some of those concerns by the fact that laws can be made and laws can be reversed. And that's a nice thing to remember. I don't think it makes EPA or CPAG particularly happy, but there are things I know in the draft agreement and the ordinance that would require a notification to occur when that happens. So whatever, anyway, raise those concerns. I think it's a significant leap. And so I just hope that we have the ability as a group to weigh in with our thoughts, questions, and concerns before anything is finalized.
Yeah, and to speak just directly to the weighing in piece, just, I know that, I mean, I personally worked for a city for 7 years, and I've seen the city commission, like, public comment period kind of go crickets a number of times.
Yeah.
But included in those multiple readings on the planning commission and the city council meetings those are the city established formal public comment periods for those things. So if that helps at all, they're built into the system, whether or not they're
Right.
used is a different question sometimes, but I know that y'all can use them to whatever degree that you would like.
No, and I had a wonderful debate with one of my dear friends that I've known forever in the Attorney General's office over this particular issue, and pointed out that the statutory responsibility of EPA, statutory responsibility of CDPHE has basically come from a health protection perspective. We get that. That is one of the perspectives, obviously, we care about locally. But the other factors that come in, such as the economic factors, the impact on economic development, things like that, that's out of the wheelhouse of CDPHE. It's out of the wheelhouse of EPA. And so that is one of the things that I particularly have been concerned about, to say, okay, how do we balance those issues? And frankly, I'm still, maybe it's just because I haven't been paying attention, but I'm still not completely comfortable with that. But Sarah has been wonderful. Anytime I've had a question, reached out to discuss it and answer my questions. EPA's done the same thing. So.
And I will highlight that CPAG's attorney raised his hand. I also saw that Kevin raised his hand.
Two things on your comment. The problem, the difference, again, with Salt Lake and here, Kennecott Copper Rio Tinto is the source. This last winter, they had to go in and dig out a bunch of ground. In Utah, when they do it, it has frost line seismic. So you created a trench that was 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep. All they had to do was call up Kennecott, ask them where they wanted the material. They took it, it was over. Here in Pueblo, that will not happen. There is no source. So we as citizens of Pueblo are gonna be held responsible for it. No more, no less. When the Salt Lake got this, they had the source. So the cleanup there went completely different. I mean, me and Sabrina went over this at first when I got on, saying, why isn't this happening? Well, it can't happen here, there's no source. Okay, so I think in the long picture, you're 100% correct. We as citizens of Pueblo will be strapped with this forever. The cost of a bucket of contaminated soil is going up drastically. It's not going to be easy to get rid of. Everything I've read, Kansas State University, everything's going to zero skate when it comes to brownfields and such projects as this, just because you cannot get rid of the contaminated material. So.
Let's go to Jonathan. I don't know if you've meant to put your hand down, and then I do. And then because Viola's here and she came on an airplane to be here, and I want to make sure we have enough time for her to discuss the task. So let's conclude this part in 2 minutes, but know that this is a long-term topic. We will be coming back to this, and there will be a lot of process and ongoing discussion about it. Okay, Jonathan.
I did mean to put my hand down. Sarah covered everything excellently. I just wanted to reassure folks that are concerned that yes, Pueblo has to have at least 2 public hearings, if not more, to get this all through. and they have to send out mailers to everyone affected. So there's going to be ways for y'all to weigh in. And I think one of the benefits of this model over, say, CDPHE imposing this without a Pueblo ordinance is that Pueblo does get to weigh in on its development strategies and how they can balance it with economic concerns. So I hear those concerns, and I just want to share that I think this method might be the one for that. Just keep your ear out for when those things are coming, and let us know if you have any questions about the zoning process. That's all.
Can we get a courtesy notice of everything that occurs to us here at CAG? We have our collective emails, but what you're talking about is city notice to citizens, say, that are in the residential area. Frankly, if we're going to weigh in, I would love to have a courtesy notice to us, and that way we can know what's going on, when it's going on, and anything we want to say.
Does that seem possible? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Sarah.
Yeah, I think I've been things to say, but yes. As with many of the other, documents that you guys see in final, and then we, draft, and then we send, hey, this was finalized.
Yeah.
We'll do the same with that.
Understood.
And we'll text you like we usually do. And we like the text. So.
Yeah. Good. Okay, let's go to Viola and let's talk about tasks, and because we wanted a little bit of time to end here too. We're transitioning people from Tree to Viola, but also it just seems like a really useful time to check back in about what the task is, what the role is of the task advisor, what this CAG wants, which may be different than it's had or wanted in the past, or maybe the same. So, yeah. Viola,
Who else needs a task? And you're gonna define tasks, right?
Because we keep saying tasks.
Yes, I am. So, yes, my name is Viola Cooper, and I work for Sitio Solutions. I have worked with communities like yours, have very many years of experience working with communities like yours. Just a different place, but a lot of the same issues that I've heard over the years. So thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to talk about the TASK program. So TASK stands for Technical Assistance Services for Communities, and it is a national contract. So EPA, we are Sitio Solutions, we are the prime contractor for the TASK program, and it's an independent assistance to help communities understand just difficult, challenging environmental issues into understandable language, however that looks like with, fact sheets or meetings or whatever it is, that's the kind of support that TASK can provide. And it could be like an informational assistance, review and explain document, a cleanup document. This is all Superfund related. And we get subject matter expertise that includes scientists, engineers, and other professionals. And again, it is independent from EPA. So we do work with you all, community members, together to participate effectively in the Superfund cleanup and decision-making process. So how does it benefit you and the community that are affected by the Superfund site? A lot of this environmental terms and environmental reports and documents are really technical. So just as you all were discussing here tonight, it's something that we can support you with, as Sydney mentioned, by having a steering committee meeting outside of this meeting to talk about some of those issues, come up with, help you draw up your comments for the ESC.
That's what I wanted to hear.
We talked about that before you came in, Terry. Yeah. So
Let's expand that a little bit, but go ahead.
And in addition to the technical
assistance. You know, this community has had the training and support for the environmental employment opportunities through the Superfund Job Training Initiative program. I don't know if you all were here back in 2018. So, you know, I knew about that. So, you know, first of all, again, let me get back up. Thank you all, CAG members, for hanging in here year after year, plugging in, being involved in your community. I jotted some things down as you were talking. Kevin asked, as a CAG member, you know, running into those contractors, and you, I'm sure, were talking about this is a Superfund site. You were sort of involving them, informing them, and educating them about the Superfund site. And that is the role of a CAG, right? A CAG member. You probably didn't even know you were doing it. It's just a
I was
natural
wondering if the DPA was doing their job.
Hey, that man.
Well, everybody has a job to do, and that you as a CAG member, that is one of your responsibilities, to make sure you come here, and I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. So, but let me finish with the top task program. My PC is running out of battery, so I'm just gonna have to like, go on. Speed talk. So anyways, again, thank you for inviting me here. I'll be happy to work with you all. You know, we are under EPA's direction, so, and at the same time, it does take time for EPA to put the contract together. So I do want you guys to recognize, you know, the RPM and the CIC for all that they do, besides the cleanup work that we do. So that's what I have to say about the task program. Did I miss anything? I want to go on to the CAG. And some
Don't finish, I'll wait. So, yeah.
Okay, great. And so the CAG roles and responsibilities, only because I'm new, I just wanted to sort of go over, and this is not all of it, but, you know, the CAG is designed to serve as a focal point for exchange of information about the cleanup. Not about any cleanup, but about the Superfund cleanup, because that's why we're here, right? Okay, so that's what it is, and we all know that the CAGs are not decision-making bodies, but can influence the decisions that EPA makes.
We try.
Yes. So my PC has run out, so I'm gonna, I took a picture of it just to make sure that I don't.
Wow.
Yeah. Second order of technology.
Yeah. And membership in the CAG should reflect the composition of the community near the site. And I'm sure you all have, you know, you bring your issues and concerns from your community to talk about it here at CAG.
Yeah.
And so, and then in turn, you take those, the cleanup information back to your community. So if you'd like to learn more about CAGs and in general, because there's a huge, like, you know, website and booklets and guidance about CAGs. I know Beth said she'd be happy to send those over to you all and or to me, and then I can send them over to you.
I think that last year when we were doing that update and evaluation process, we
Yeah.
shared all the links, and we can
Oh,
resurrect
good.
those at any point.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, and so, you know, I jotted some other stuff down here about, environmental topics, yeah. Sharing information with the public, great that you are all engaging in such good conversations and questions here. This is what it's all about. Yeah.
Should we go to Terry? He has a question or a comment, or probably both.
And usually a question after a long speech. but not
Yeah.
No, one of the things that we really struggled with is whenever we've seen a concern we have wanted to reduce our concern to writing and then aim it at whatever appropriate level is, because many of the concerns that we have raised are beyond the wheelhouse of the local EPA folks. They have to follow the rules, regulations that are given to them. So we have written things. That's a difficult process because, first of all, we're all busy and we don't speak the right languages. So we really struggle with pulling together the drafting. We typically will have a few questions. We get our minds around what we think are the questions that we have that we want answers to, but then getting that literally put into something simple, straightforward that goes out has been difficult. And so several of us in the room have taken stabs at drafting things. It's an exhausting process if you're not engaged in this all the time. All of that said, I'm hoping Sitio can help us draft documents when we say, hey, we as a CAG would like to write a letter or comments or whatever, that you can help us with that because you can speak the language and you can draft it a heck of a lot quicker than we do, and better. Okay, that's what I was hoping for. Thank you. I will stand down.
Part of that is understanding the issues, right?
Right.
And so my role would be to make sure that you're understanding it in a way that you can explain it to other people that,
Right.
you know, you can.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Velma, yes.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, for being here and for the explanation. I think, as you were saying, I really think that we as CAG members and the agency representatives and other folks, we really do have, for the most part, good communication. I mean, sometimes there are things that, like Terry said, are beyond the authority of our state and regional agency folks. And that's not always something that's easy to hear. And sometimes we ask the same questions over and over again and make nuisance of ourselves. And then sometimes we get irritable when we get the same answer because, you know, it's just because we're asking the same question. And hoping for a different answer, we know what that is. But I think one of the things that I'd like to say has bothered me a little bit in working with Sitio, and it's well intentioned, but and I think it's a fine line to walk, that there have been times when, and I think it's a communication issue, there have been times when we would ask a question or not be satisfied with the outcome, and maybe what we really needed to do was write a letter to the administrator or whatever. But it seemed like what was happening was EPA or the state would do a perfectly good job of explaining what was going on. And we would be understanding pretty much what they were saying. And then the field person would come in and basically restate what EPA had already said, which we already understood. And so sometimes, I know I did, I shouldn't say we, sometimes I would get time, and I appreciated and had good working relationship, but sometimes I get a little annoyed, and I said, you know, if I want to know what EPA thinks, I'll ask EPA, you know, and they're perfectly well equipped telling me what they think, you know? I don't need somebody to tell me what EPA just told me. And so I'm hoping that we can get better at using resources at steel so that we're actually looking for and getting information that we're not able to get or it's not appropriate to get from the other members of the team.
Well, I look forward to working with you and
Yeah.
So, Donna, you read my mind. I put my card up after you put your card up, and you talked about exactly what I wanted to hit on, which is kind of the distinction between task and EPA. You have heard from some of our like technical folks, the toxicologists, the hydrogeologists, you've heard from some of them, and so I wanted to just say out loud, which I think you already know, and then I have a second point, which I will come back to, but that we want to make sure that you can hear directly from those folks, and then really for task is, I really want to make sure we're clear on like, we're not trying to, EPA is not directing task to do things, but really, we really want to see like, we're paying for task to be here, but we want the request to come from y'all to task, then task provides the service, instead of like what you're talking about, where they provide the service when you didn't necessarily need that. So I just wanted to say that out loud, Viola's nodding with me, so I just wanted to clarify that, which reminded me of my second point, which I think you're well aware of. Ryan, I forget if you mentioned this already, so if you did, forgive me. Jason Fritz, our very wise and educated toxicologist, okay, gave a presentation in September, and there was a big storm in Pueblo, so not as many people were able to come. He gave a presentation, and I have this rule based on our capacity in my group about recording meetings only on these quarterly days, so I didn't record it. You requested for us to redo the presentation. Jason offered, he was not able to come to tonight's meeting, but he is able to present in November, so we'll be redoing that presentation in November. And I will make an exception, and we will record only his section of the presentation, not the whole 2-hour meeting. It's just a bandwidth issue in-house. We have to provide closed captioning. So whatever that's why I'm talking so loud, so that the technology picks up what I'm saying, and then it makes the captions better. So I have to have someone who goes through and reads every single line of what we're saying, and that takes time. So I will, anyway, just to clarify that we will be doing that, but that was a great example of, we want to hear from the EPA, we want task support. So just to clarify that it's not a one or the other, it's a both and in different situations.
I'm really glad that you raised that too, Velma, because I think, Viola, one thing that we can talk about is how to make sure before you all as CAG members send Viola off to do something, that there's a real meeting of the minds in terms of what are the questions that you have. And Viola, I think, for you to say, here are the questions I hear you saying, am I hearing you right? Because I do think that that's something that can go crosswise sometimes. Or, one or two people have it's not a huge group of community members who are involved, but they're very engaged and they know a lot and they have strong, opinions and questions. Anyway, so I think that it's great to have somebody who's, in a way maybe new helps because you can make sure you get clarity on those things. I'm still learning about the site too. Yeah.
We'll teach it.
Okay, well, that's great. So, any other questions or comments about the task advisor? Yeah, Kevin.
So, I don't know if I misunderstood you. You earlier mentioned the QU2 property. So the assessment on Reunión Lake itself has not been finalized on the fish or the water.
Yes.
Okay, second, is there any way to alter the way you're testing down there?
So I think the short answer is we're not taking feedback on our sampling plan. So
What?
Our sampling plan, like how we collect it, whether we sample quarterly or whatever.
Oh, no, I don't mean that.
Okay.
I would like to see an extra test, 2 extra tests done.
Okay.
One on the north side of the levee.
For water, sorry, can you clarify,
Yes,
you're looking at water or?
It would be on Phelps Creek.
Okay, sorry, what creek?
On Phelps Creek.
PFGL.
It is outside,
Mhm.
it isn't inside the scope of the
If it's outside of the
No,
Superfund
it's inside.
site,
It's
okay.
inside. okay?
Okay.
It's in the site.
Comes in
Okay, the thing is,
Runyon Lake. Yeah.
there's only two sources of water going into Runyon Lake.
Yeah.
One is coming down Phelps Creek from the river walk,
Uh-huh.
and then Hart has a culvert underneath the levee that dumps into Phelps Creek. Okay, when the contractor shut down Phelps Creek this summer, the fish that were above the levee survived in the smaller pond. The fish that were below the levee died in the small pond. There have been 6 beaver died in that stretch of water, 4 raccoons, and a couple cats. So I'd like to see if there's a water, because there is no way to control what goes into that culvert. There's 2 open spots on the levee where I can see that you can just walk up and dump whatever you want. That test, I test it above the levee and below the levee, and then you have one that's on the water that goes out from the levee. And second, I'm not sure where the health department's doing their test at Runyon Field itself. But the thing about Runyon Field is, one, the drinking water is separate from the water on the well that waters all the grass. So if they're only testing the water that's inside the field, they're getting clean water no matter what. But if they're not testing the well, then this is water, if it is contaminated, that we're throwing on grass, we're throwing on between all the games, they're watering down the dirt. So there's a lot of water going down that people are playing on, warming up on, sliding into. So I think that we need to determine if the test that they're doing is coming from the well, the water is the irrigation well, let's put it that way, and the water that's inside the complex itself.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say, and I may hand it to Sydney, but when you're describing concerns about beaver, raccoon, cats, and such thing, that is very sad to hear because I love them, but you heard me say this before, I don't think you're gonna like my answer, so I'll preface it with that. We are looking at impacts from the former smelter that existed 100 years ago. So if there is active, I would be, I don't know, I'm not a toxicologist, so I'd really struggle to understand like what level of lead or arsenic an animal would need to run into to die immediately. But Sydney's making a face.
And my comment to you is that why are you there?
Well,
To address some of the
this is, I'm gonna cut.
Yeah, go for it.
So, but the question that I have from you, I think this is something we can consider, right? We need to see what's coming into Runyon Lake, because that's a contribution to Runyon Lake being somewhere that we're cleaning up. The question though is, we're in like a hypothetical, right? Let's say that we figure out south of the ditch of Phelps, there's contamination coming in. EPA cannot clean that. So the question then is like, what would you like done with that data? Because we can only clean smelter related contamination. So with that understanding, if we were to test that area and those inputs, like, I'm not sure how that contributes into the site itself.
Well, first of all, we need to go back to 1921. After the smelter was closed and the flood happened. That area was flat. Anything that is around Runyon Lake is man-made, including Runyon Lake itself, okay? So there are no contaminants from the Boston smelter. As I said to you, you might as well start looking in Kansas or Oklahoma. That flood affected 300 square miles. So to go down there and say we're not gonna clean up CF&I's problem, which it is, then why are we continuing to search for this when it's not there?
I'm not sure I understand.
Are you saying that any runoff from the Colorado smelter up on the hill that got down to that level would have been washed away by the great flood?
Yeah, because the smelter closed in 1918.
Yeah.
So the flood happened in 21. So destroyed any,
You're saying what is EPA doing there now if it's hard for you to imagine that any contamination from the smelter is still here, so that it all would have washed away.
and if you read the history books, CF&I is responsible for the contamination. The city has told me that big hill where the academy is an old CF&I firm. Okay, there was an erosion problem on it, and I think they fixed it. So anything, levee, the ball fields were stolen from someplace else in Pueblo, everything is man-made down in that.
I have a suggestion about this. This seems like a can of worms and an interesting question, and also a side, maybe conversation between, right, EPA, Kevin, and maybe bring back to the next tag meeting what you all, if there's some follow-up discussion. It just seems like this is a big topic, especially when we start. And I wonder if there are other tag members who also might want to talk more about this, and come back, and we'll come back at the next tag meeting, and you can tell us the sort of update. But because we have to wrap up in 5 minutes, I don't want to go too far into this, because it's just like maybe a big conversation.
Well, as we stand today, there is nobody in this state that will take responsibility for the body of water.
At Reunión.
Okay?
Okay.
The state will not, wildlife, says it's not their issue.
Uh-huh.
PCD, Pueblo Conservative District, owns all the property around it. The water is not their
Okay.
responsibility.
So the question is, you looking after wondering about who's taking responsibility for the water quality, running like any impacts on kids playing in the fields?
Well, no, you cannot water, you cannot wade into that water.
Right.
Okay, but you can fish in it, you can catch the fish and eat them.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't we put Reunión Lake as a big question mark, especially if there's a question mark of it being a legal no person's land. And Velma, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that it get put on the list of items for future agenda.
Follow. Yeah.
Because I think, it's got that area is very complex industrial history, as well as hydrology and also, regulatory complexity.
Are there people who could do a little mini presentation about Reunión Lake and how it intersects with the Superfund site or not? In terms of both from a community perspective, from a regular, just like a little.
well, what did you say? I didn't hear the whole thing.
I'm wondering if there's someone along with you who, from a city perspective, can give us a little mini explanation about Reunión Lake and the complex history of it, but as it interacts with the Superfund site. Yeah. Because that's the nexus to the CAG, and there may be a whole separate city process or thing that's happening.
Yeah, I think that's the question before, I think we can put this on the agenda, but really understanding how EPA is entwined with this, understanding that Reunión is part of our study area, but also again, when we're talking about the unhoused, making sure that we're in the right forum, because if this is something that doesn't have to do with the Colorado Smelter and what we have the authority to do, if this needs to go up through this state level and have a site assessment done by the state, and then if this turns it into it needs to go to a site investigation with an EPA level, right? So if it's a different source of contamination, which is what we've been hearing when we talk about this, just making sure that we are going the right avenue opposed to just talking about it here where it's not really smelter related.
No, that's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's more information out there because the USGS has probably 50 monitoring wells on the south side of the lake, between the lake and the Arkansas River.
Is it on the
No. According to Mr. Zip, Alexander Zip, who's the head of the Trout Association, told me at one time that Reunión Lake is supposed to be a fishery to restock the Arkansas below Fountain Creek because of the damage Fountain Creek caused the Arkansas, and the contamination from Fountain Creek. And you cannot put a little fish into the stream.
Yeah,
A little fish has to kind of grow up.
yeah, right, exactly. Well, let's have a little conversation after this meeting, because I do think it's a sort of question about, let's put it on the future agenda and let's, for the CAG, and figure out the nexus to EPA and the Superfund, and then maybe there are separate, maybe this is a good way, Kevin, to spur some separate conversations that may need to happen with either the city or state. So maybe we could check it
Well,
out.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because I know that nobody wants to take responsibility
Yeah.
for the body of
That's what
water.
it sounds like.
Okay, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And if it's considered part of the Arkansas Basin, then the, the Water Quality Control Commission might have something to say about it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm just trying to figure out is like, where's the right avenue to address this? Because like, you know, this is, I don't want this
Because
happening.
deciding if it's part of the Superfund site is
Correct.
part of the investigation.
Definitely.
So up to that point, then you're within your purview to
Right,
acquire the information
and
and
part,
data, yeah.
definitely, and that's what was part of sharing when we gave that screening level ecological risk assessment, is like part of that was identifying data gaps, so we are collecting more data within OU2 to make sure. So I think you bringing this up is the appropriate time as we're developing sampling locations and identifying data gaps, like, is this a data gap that we're missing? Do we not have this data and we need it, right? So this is something that we can most definitely look into and see, like, do we need to grab a couple of samples from these inputs to run it?
Okay.
So I this is the right spot, but I just,
Yeah.
you know, I don't wanna get too deep into it without knowing for sure if this is a purview that
Right.
smelter wise EPA.
So, Cindy, just, I guess, before we wrap this up, in terms of thinking about this after the meeting, so is this, it sounds like you can imagine going back and looking into, is this a data gap for EPA, and or is there more that you can imagine doing on your end in terms of trying to figure out, is this within the purview of the Water Quality Control Commission, et cetera?
So this would be, I'm gonna tie in probably, so, OU2 is Erica, so she will, I'm gonna speak for her. She doesn't know that I'm now assigning her this. What will happen is that we'll tie in our hydrogeologists, we'll tie in our toxicologists, our ecological risk assessors, because that's where the identification from the screening level, ecological risk assessment to the baseline, that's where that identification of data gaps is there. So what we'll do is now talk with them and say, hey, this was brought up, and with the understanding that there are animals dying at some of these inlets, do we have data here? Is this something that EPA has authority to be looking into and remediating, right? So that's something that is a discussion that we can have with our toxicological folks and our team to see. We haven't finalized all of our sampling plans. There's always room for a little bit of adjustment if necessary. And so I think it's something we can definitely look into.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we need to wrap up, but my understanding is that we are meeting virtually in November. We're gonna have a presentation from Jason Fritz. I don't know if anyone were either of you, Paul, Velma, Terry, were any or all of you at the, Velma was.
And Jimmy.
Velma and Jimmy were at the presentation. So Velma, I think especially given what you heard at the presentation, if you have feedback about, here are the things that I heard that I think are gonna be really interesting to CAG members. If you have suggestions, feel free to pass them along to me or Beth or whatever, because I think the more that presenters know what CAG members want to hear, they know what the relevant questions are, they know, you know, anyway, the better. And so I think we in general want to avoid any presenters coming to the CAG without a clear sense of what the questions are, what the asks are, and what people are going to be most interested in hearing about. So let's aim for that. And then one last thing is, in December, as you know, I was out of the loop for a while and I'm back in, but I have a conflict in December. So I'm wondering, I know that sometimes we skip our December meetings because the holidays are crazy. Are people comfortable at this point with skipping December and resuming in January, should we kind of have a question mark about whether there's a steering committee meeting on a different day? We check in next month.
Yeah, my thought has always been, first of all, if you ask me to cancel a meeting, I'd say yes, a meeting. Too many meetings, but the thought is if anything comes up, it could be shared with us by email.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it, and then just.
Yeah,
roll it in
if there's some crisis, we can always convene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or some need for input.
Or if there's like movement on the ESP plus, I'll let y'all know.
Yeah.
But not expecting it to happen during holidays, because that's like a lot
Right,
of
it's the
time.
last time.
But like, yeah, I mean,
Oh,
again,
Paul gave us a thumbs up, so we got.
All right, good call. Thank you. I'm glad to hear.
Feedback.
Paul, since we have you on the screen, is there anything else you want to say before we adjourn?
Oh, nothing in particular. I agree mostly with what Terry and Bowman had said. And yeah, we got a lot of stuff to do here to get these new levels set. So be looking forward to that.
Sounds good. We hope your car gets better. Good wishes for your car. Okay, is that everything? Did we miss anything before we wrap up here? Good? Great to see the new faces, and thanks everyone for being here in person. Have a great rest of your evening.
Happy new fiscal year.
Happy new
Jewish
fiscal
New Year.
Happy holidays.
It's a big week for me.
It's small. Bye, everybody. Have a good night. Just put your in the highlight.
Yeah.
I have all the information.
That's my favorite.
And everyone's